Discover the incredible $1 encounter, how a cowboy found his soulmate behind a hidden mask. Jake stared into the mirror, fiddling with his collar as his world shrank around him. The heat of Texas sun bore down outside, illuminating the vast fields of his family's ranch, an unending stretch of responsibility. In a town where ranching had birched into bloodlines, Jake felt the weight of his family's legacy pressing harder against his chest. Here he stood, a cowboy by day, harvester of cattle lined with their expectations, when all he yearned for was to swirl paint across a canvas, spilling the colorful truth of his soul. Tonight's masquerade ball beckoned, a slip into anonymity where dreams mingled with the laughter of neighbors. Yet here he was, dressed in jeans and a hat that barely concealed his face, drawn by a flicker of hope amid artistic despair. Standing at the threshold of the community hall, the sound of banter and clinking glasses wrapped around him. But inside him churned a tempest of doubt. Did he truly have the right to explore this other side of himself? What if everyone whispered behind his back that he was a fool, trading legacy for paint? Before he could second-guess his instincts, laughter erupted, and there she was, Clara, a vision behind a meticulously designed mask, playful eyes gleaming. The banter flowed naturally, illuminating the air like fireflies. "A cowboy? Bet you ride into the sunset with a canvas tucked under your arm," she teased, her laughter tugging at the corners of his mouth. Jake chuckled, but beneath the surface he felt a thrill that danced dangerously close to revelation. As they conversed, every word exchanged deepened the connection, pulling at the strings of his heart. Clara mirrored his own aspirations, speaking candidly of her own struggles as an aspiring artist. He drank in her words, the way she effortlessly navigated the balance between passion and obligation, a mirror to his own festering conflict. Doubt slithered through him. Could he really trust this strange chemistry, or was it just another distraction from what was expected of him? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. The night ebbed into deeper hours. Laughter faded into strains of music, their dialogue tapering between shared passions and unnamed fears. He found himself captivated, each moment revealing layers, yet beneath the surface churned a potent unrest. Jake could feel his commitment to the ranch, to his family, tightening its grip like a noose around his aspirations. What did it mean for him to step outside the expected path? To dip his brush into a world perceived as frivolous? To dare beyond the boundaries of who a cowboy ought to be? By the end of the evening, he held Clara's hand for one lingering moment, electricity buzzing between them. But even as he walked away, something had shifted inside him. A longing thrummed violently against a wall of Morris family tradition. The doubts washed over him like a sudden storm, questioning if perhaps he was foolish to even dream of painting success, fearing he might indeed lose everything that tied him to generations past. He hesitated on the cusp of choice, knowing tomorrow would bring a revelation, a decision point that could shatter the silence of his yearning. The moment slipped away, leaving him anxious and raw, wrestling with the single question that haunted him. Could he genuinely reconcile the art within him with the legacy behind him? Jake awoke the next morning to a sepia-toned sunrise filtering through his window, painting his room in hues that felt both warm and suffocating. The sound of distant cattle stirred from their resting place, calling him back to the daily rhythm of ranch life. But the remnants of his conversation with Clara echoed loudly in his mind. In that fleeting interaction, something had shifted, an awakening he hadn't anticipated. The gravity of his dreams pressed against the walls of tradition, and he felt the urgency to confront what those dreams really meant. As he sat at the kitchen table, a plate of untouched breakfast before him, the air thickened with tension. His father's voice chimed through his thoughts, laden with expectation. "A man's duty is the land, Jake." Those words, while ingrained in his identity, now felt like a barrier to who he wanted to become. He picked at his food, contemplating every grain of grit versus the artistic freedom he yearned for. Mid-morning found him in the stables, the earthy scent of hay and leather grounding him in the moment. He tended to the horses mechanically, each movement instinctual but distant. His mind replayed his encounter with Clara, her laughter, and how she had sparked a flicker of courage within him. Perhaps this was the beginning of something, a chance to explore a side of himself he had suppressed for too long. But could he shake off the Morris family's expectations and redefine what it meant to be a cowboy? He sensed a change in the air and picked up the paintbrush he had left dry in the corner of his workshop. The familiar weight felt foreign and exhilarating, as if each bristle held the promise of liberation. His heart raced as he squeezed the paint tubes, the vibrant colors eliciting a flood of inspiration. Here, amid the chaos of conflicting identities, stood a blank canvas, an opportunity to carve his own path. He painted with feverish determination, releasing a torrent of emotions across the canvas, each stroke shouting a silent rebellion against his inherited roles. Yet, even as he lost track of time in his creative frenzy, the nagging doubt returned like an uninvited guest. Was it selfish to pursue painting at the cost of his family's pride? Jake paused, hurtling into a somber reflection. Every shove against his brush felt like a betrayal. The ranch, the cows, the land, it all defined him, didn't it? Or was this merely an imposition of love wrapped in obligation? The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of creativity and conflict. He found solace in Clara's company, their shared mornings filled with color and joy as they painted together, revealing not just their art but also the layers of their hearts. In the whispers of dusk, he dared to articulate the ambitions he had locked away, finding strength in her encouragement. "You paint who you are," she would remind him, an anchor in the wild sea of his emotions. But as he pushed further into his newfound self, the urge to create clashed violently with the demands of the ranch. The phone calls from his father grew more insistent, the stakes of his choice rising like the Texas sun. The decision narrowed down to a point just beyond his grasp, framing a pivotal confrontation with his family that felt imminent, laden with possibilities. He couldn't avoid it much longer. The upcoming cattle auction loomed on the calendar, a pivotal moment for the Morris family. Would he stand there, a solid figure in support of tradition, or would he carve out a daring space for his art and for himself? He felt the pulse of potential change beating faster, urging him to take a stand. The moment had come to confront the expectations wrapping tightly around his spirit and to lay his dreams bare before his family. The rustle of opportunity brushed ever closer. What he didn't know was that this confrontation would pull at more than just the strings of his heart. It would challenge everything he believed about legacy and love, setting the stage for the choices that would redefine him forever. What could a cowboy truly become if he dared to follow his passion into the unknown? Jake stood on the porch, the sun beating down on the sprawling expanse of the ranch. He was a silhouette against the rising light, embodying the tension that filled the air. Tomorrow was the cattle auction, and with it came the weight of expectation. The thought of lofty traditions juxtaposed against his awakening desires left him unsettled. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles white as he grappled with the repercussions of his choices. The whisper of the wind echoed the voices in his mind, each representing a different part of himself. On one side, there was the dutiful son, the rancher, molded to inherit family obligations. On the other lurked the dreamer, the artist who dared to envision life outside the dusty boundaries of the ranch. He had invested so much in his art, yet here he was, teetering between passion and obligation. Clara's face flickered through his thoughts, her laughter like a beacon amidst the chaos he felt brewing inside. That evening, he found himself standing in front of the canvas once more, the vivid colors that exploded onto its surface starkly contrasting the muted shades of his reality. Each stroke revealed a raw honesty he had been afraid to confront. The painting morphed into a representation of his inner turmoil, a clash between the life expected of him and the one he yearned to embrace. As night draped its velvet cover over the ranch, shadows danced through his mind. Images of tomorrow, a room filled with family, friends, and the soft hum of anticipation, flashed before him. There, he would be expected to present himself as the prodigal son, the steadfast cowboy ready to uphold his family's legacy. But where would his voice find sanctuary? Would he simply acquiesce, conforming to a role he had never fully embraced? Sleep eluded him that night, thoughts racing like the hooves of a herd galloping through his mind. Would reconciliation be possible between his two selves, between tradition and ambition? There was a heavy pull toward the ranch, a sense of duty instilled since childhood. He could hear his father's words echo in his ears. A man's duty is the land. Yet, images of paint splatters on his worn jeans and Clara's encouragement ignited a fire within him that felt too exhilarating to ignore. Morning dawned with an unavoidable confrontation hanging over him like storm clouds ready to unleash torrential rain. He shuffled through breakfast, each bite a reminder of his internal strife. His father's voice rang out, a steady monologue of expectation. "You'll help with the cattle today, right, son?" It wasn't a question so much as a command, demanding his compliance, while the weight of his silent rebellion coiled tightly in his gut. "Yes, of course," Jake replied, his voice devoid of conviction. The day passed in a blur of chores and cattle, each moment anchoring him deeper in the world he was beginning to see as a cage. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely another step onto the path that had been laid out before him, one taken by generations of Morris men. As dusk approached, however, Clara drove into the ranch, her smile bright against the surrounding shadows. Her presence ignited the spark that had been dulled throughout the day. They sat amidst scattered art supplies in his workshop, discussing canvases and colors, visions and possibilities, a silken thread of hope weaving through their exchanged words. Once again, she urged him to embrace what lay within. "Tomorrow is the first step," she said, as if deciphering the conflict within him. "What if I fail?" he asked, the weight of his fears spilling into their sacred space. "You won't know until you try," she replied, sincerity illuminating her gaze. Could he genuinely embrace the artist inside him without sacrificing the rancher he had been groomed to become? As he helped his father with the cattle, Jake's movements became automatic, almost robotic. The menial tasks provided a refuge from his thoughts, but offered no true solace. Each whistle of a steer reminded him that an auction awaited, not just of cattle, but of himself. This event stood as both a culmination of years of expectation and a potential launchpad for his own burgeoning identity. As he corrected the posture of a stubborn calf, an idea took root. He could make his own announcement at the auction, a declaration to himself and his community about who he was. The day crawled along, making way for the looming evening and the auction preparations. Each moment held a tension he could hardly bear. He caught glimpses of his father's pride, glimpses of what was expected of him, yet his mind continued to drift towards visions of art and an unbound existence. Clara surfaced in his thoughts often, her belief in him a beacon of hope amidst the fog of his indecision. In the waning light, he finally understood that the greatest art he could create was not simply on canvas, but through the life he chose to lead. He wanted to bridge the gap between his heart's calling and the legacy he inherited. The echo of his father's voice played in his mind. "A man's duty is the land." That echoed the solemnness of his ancestry, but Jake felt an urgency to redefine what that duty meant. Could his commitment to the ranch coexist with the pursuit of personal fulfillment? Clara's words floated back to him, "You won't know until you try." It was a risky thought, but as the sun began to set, painting the sky in vivid hues, he felt the spark of rebellion kindle within him. Tonight, he would face his father's expectations and reveal his newfound purpose, not in defiance, but as a bridge connecting his past with his envisioned future. He picked up a brush, the raw materials of his artist's soul clawing to be released. What came next would not be merely an expression of paint, but a manifesto of his identity. As Jake moved towards the cattle auction venue, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursed through him. This was not merely his father's world, it was his as well. He was prepared to claim ownership not just of the cattle on display, but of the dreams he long kept at bay. The murmurs of the auction crowd surrounded him, a sea of voices waiting for the first bid to announce the ritual of commerce. But Jake stepped up, his heart pounding, prepared to announce something much more invaluable than currency. In that moment of reckoning, he realized the true auction was not about cattle. It was about his identity, his choice, and the courage to redefine legacy. The room filled with anticipation as he grasped the microphone, taking a deep breath, waiting for the first question, the first challenge. As he opened his mouth to speak, a rush of doubts flooded back. Was he genuinely ready to confront generations? Would they accept him, or was this moment destined to be his undoing? But just as the uncertainty surged, Jake felt something change within. He was not just stepping into the auction, he was stepping into himself. What would flow from his heart now, he couldn't predict, but he felt the exhilarating weight of potential stir in the air around him. Standing before the crowd, he sensed the shift in the narrative. His own story was about to unfold. And as he began to speak, a realization dawned. This was not just a declaration, but an uprising of the truth he had long denied. The trajectory of his life was no longer the exclusive domain of his father's dreams. It would be the canvas upon which Jake would finally paint his own. Yet, just as he opened his mouth, a familiar face appeared in the crowd, one that could alter everything he thought he knew. Would she embrace the change he sought, or would she be the gatekeeper of his fears? Jake's mind raced as he stood before the crowd, the microphone in grasp and the air thick with anticipation. His eyes darted over the sea of faces, landing on Clara. Her presence felt electric, charged with questions and possibilities. Would she understand the tumult within him, or would she remain a reminder of everything he hesitated to leave behind? Jake's mind raced as he stood before the crowd, the microphone in grasp and the air thick with anticipation. His eyes darted over the sea of faces, landing on Clara. Her presence felt electric, charged with questions and possibilities. Would she understand the tumult within him, or would she remain a reminder of everything he hesitated to leave behind? "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but laced with urgency. He paused, weighing the gravity of his words against the years of tradition he had been raised to uphold. "Thank you for being here today. This auction represents so much more than our cow. It signifies the choices we make in our lives." He took a deep breath, locking eyes with Clara, seeking strength in her unwavering gaze. "I have a confession," he continued, the microphone vibrating slightly in his grip. "For far too long, I have lived under the expectation of others. My father, this ranch, and the weight of legacy. I'm here today not to simply follow tradition, but to redefine what it means to be a rancher, an artist, a man." Jake felt the murmurs swell around him, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. He pressed on, compelled by a force he could neither name nor control. "I want to create art, art that reflects this land, art that reflects me, and that starts today." The crowd leaned closer, some frowning, others whispering among themselves. He felt the tension shift, an electric charge moving through the hall. He glanced back at Clara, her face a tapestry of emotions. Determination, concern, and hope mingled in her expression. The image pulled at the strings of his heart, a bittersweet reminder of conflicting desires. Art is not just about paint on canvas. It's about living authentically, expressing oneself without fear. And I'm finally ready to embrace my truth. Taking a step closer to the edge of the stage, Jake's heartbeat drummed a demand for clarity in his message.
"This is my final bid for more than livestock. It's a bid for my future. With your support, or even your understanding, I hope to find a way to marry both the ranch and my passion for art." The air was still as his words hung in the balance. Would they welcome him, or would they cast him away for daring to challenge their expectations? Silence enveloped the room, broken only by the resonant sound of his father shifting in the back, tension radiating off him like a heat wave. Jake inhaled sharply. The stakes felt insurmountable. What if they rejected him? What if this moment was the catalyst for rifts he couldn't mend? The thought fluttered in his mind, drenching his hope in a cold fear. And then he heard it, a glimmer of applause, tentative yet gradually growing as some in the audience found their voices. Faces softened, climactic whispers filled the space as uncertainty began to dissipate. Clara stepped forward, her hands forming steady applause, and suddenly a wave of acceptance washed over him. Jake felt alive, invigorated, not just by the reaction, but by the revelation of himself in their acceptance. He understood then that his art wouldn't just be about painting. It would be the embodiment of every true emotion he had stifled to fit into a mold. Each stroke of the brush would be a declaration, a revolt against complacency. What he didn't anticipate, however, was the confrontation awaiting him afterward, the men who questioned his choices and the weight of his father's disappointment. Those encounters loomed like dark clouds threatening to overshadow his hard-won moment. As the murmurs subsided, Jake turned back to the microphone, preparing to address the crowd once more, to blend courage with vulnerability. But before he could speak again, a voice pierced through the din, strong and uncompromising. "Who do you think you are, Jake? A painter or a farmer? You can't be both." Jake's breath hitched as he focused on the speaker, an old family friend whose face reflected both skepticism and challenge. Was this the confrontation he feared? Suddenly, the stakes felt higher than ever, and Jake understood the truth. This was not merely about an auction. It was a battle of wills, identity, and the legacy he was determined to forge. With Clara's unwavering gaze behind him and a community poised on the brink, the question hung heavy in the air. Could he stand firm against the tidal wave of doubt threatening to engulf him? Jake's heart raced as he faced the familiar face, the challenge stark against the backdrop of his newly declared resolve. This was not just a question about his future as a rancher or artist. It served as a proxy for all the expectations, histories, and identities he wrestled with daily. The audience held its breath, hanging on the tension of that moment. "Who says I can't?" Jake finally replied, his voice steady but edged with adrenaline. The room felt charged, and he sensed the weight of anticipation creeping back in.
Why must I choose one identity over another? Isn't there room for both? The man snorted dismissively, but beneath that scorn, Jake saw something else. Fear. Fear of change. Fear of losing the comfort of tradition. That realization anchored Jake, and he focused his energy inward, drawing strength from the very doubts that threatened to erode him. "Every brushstroke on canvas reverberates with my truth," Jake continued, emboldened. "Leaving my roots doesn't mean I abandon my home. Rather, it builds bridges to new realities." He glanced at Clara again. Her eyes were wide, and he could see the spark of admiration there. It bolstered his resolve. Jake's gaze swept over the audience, searching for small nods and encouragement. Would they be willing to entertain the possibility of a world where art and ranching could coexist? The room remained divided, with some faces reflecting the weight of resistance, while others began to soften. He could feel the tide shifting, if only slightly. "Art speaks to the heart of who we are," he pressed. "It stirs the soil of our existence, letting the seeds of our fears and hopes grow into something vibrant and alive." The sincerity in his voice caught him by surprise. It felt genuine, almost transformative. His father's shadow loomed large at the back, tension coursing through the older man's rigid frame. Jake was acutely aware that he stood not only to face the crowd, but also the smaller, more intimate battle against familial expectations. What would it mean to his father to see him diverge from a path laid out long before he was born? Suddenly, another voice broke through. "But what about the ranch? Farms need steady hands, not dreamers." The challenge was valid, a reminder that the complexity of life often demanded unwavering dedication. Yet Jake felt a flame ignite within him. He turned his gaze to the speaker. "This ranch has been built on blood, sweat, and tears. It's taught me more than any artist's studio ever could. But that doesn't mean it has to hold me captive." A ripple of thought crossed the room, visibly altering the atmosphere. Could they assess the worth of two paths coexisting instead of pitted against each other? For the first time, Jake grasped the weight of his words, the persistence of his vision, and the potential of his future. He felt compelled to act, to confront the battles brewing inside him. "If you doubt my commitment to this land, watch me create art from it. Art that captures not just the beauty of cattle farming, but its grit, its resilience." The applause he'd felt earlier returned, tentative yet filled with a raw, burgeoning hope. Jake marveled at the shift. The first conscious steps into his own narrative were beginning to take shape. But just as momentum seemed to rise, he felt the paradox unfold. Was he truly ready to confront the pushback that awaited, not just in the crowd, but at home as well? The shadows of doubt still lingered, and Jake realized that this moment represented just the beginning. He had ventured to redefine identity and grapple with legacy. The next step lay heavily on his shoulders. The audience awaited his next move, breath held in collective doubt and intrigue. How would he navigate the turbulent waters of acceptance, especially from his father? As the murmur of voices crescendoed around him, Jake understood that the moment of truth was nearing, and he had to decide whether to forge ahead into the unknown or yield to the expectations that had confined him for so long. What awaited him beyond the stage, and how would he handle the confrontation that would undoubtedly come when he returned home? Jake stepped off the stage, the spotlight now feeling like a faded memory. The exhilaration from his speech began to ebb, replaced by a heavy weight settling deep in his chest. What had started as a path towards self-definition now felt like a precipice, threatening to fall away beneath him. The images of shocked faces and questioning looks followed him like shadows, forcing him into a reflection of his greatest fears. He gathered his resolve as he exited the bright hall, his mind racing with the implications of his bold declaration. Jake brushed his hand against the textured surface of a wooden beam, the familiar feel serving as an anchor against the uncertainty swirling in his mind. His father's reaction loomed large, overshadowing the applause that had fueled his confidence moments before. What would their next conversation be like? Would he feel justified in his ambitions, or would he face a torrent of disapproval that would make him question his very identity? Returning to the ranch, the drive felt longer than usual. Each bump in the road seemed to mirror the turmoil inside him. He could almost hear his father's rusted voice warning him against chasing dreams that were not fashioned from reality. As he pulled up to the sprawling expanse of the ranch, a stark contrast to the vibrant visions he just shared on stage, Jake caught sight of his father out in the field, moving purposefully among the cattle. The sun was beginning to set, painting the landscape with warm hues, yet Jake felt cold. He was about to walk into battle, and he wasn't sure which side he'd end up on. "Hey, Dad," Jake called out, forcing his voice to stay calm as he approached. The older man paused, his weathered face casting a shadow of wariness that made Jake's heart race. "Thought you were busy with your fancy speeches," his father replied, a hint of sarcasm edging his tone. It stung, but Jake welcomed it as a familiar defense mechanism, one he had often encountered in their interactions. "I was just explaining how I want to merge both ranching and painting." Jake's voice trembled as the words left his mouth, feeling both foreign and liberating. "I want to create art from our life here."
There's so much beauty, so many stories within these fields, and I want to show that. The old man turned to face his son fully, his expression unreadable. "And what makes you think people want to see that? They want a man who can work, not a boy chasing fantasies." Each word dripped. There was more than just skepticism. It was a challenge, a barrier that Jake had to break through. "I can't just live for what others expect me to be," Jake replied, steel creeping into his voice. "What have I shown you, Dad? I love this ranch, but my heart stirs with something more. Wouldn't you want me to pursue that?" Silence stretched between them, thick as the tension itself. Jake could sense his father weighing options, running contrasting scenarios in his mind, vision after vision, each insisting on its rightness. He knew his father valued hard work, tradition, and the threadbare legacy of their family that shadowed every decision made on the ranch. But Jake had to believe both paths could intertwine if he had the courage to forge ahead amidst the storm. "What do you really want, son?" The question came suddenly, piercing through the remote facade. It felt raw, possibly vulnerable, and it forced Jake to confront his own truth. He hesitated, feeling the gravity of that moment. "I want to show you that a painter can be a farmer too, that they can coexist. I want to prove that there's beauty in the blend of both worlds." His father's gaze softened for a moment, and then, like a tide pulling back, it vanished. "You think you can change things just because you want it? Maybe it's not just about changing things. Maybe it's about evolving who we are." Jake felt the urgency to break through, to find his father's heart inside the armor of tradition. The answer lingered, just out of reach, the gap between them feeling as wide as the horizon. As the ranch settled into night, Jake realized that this wasn't just about proving himself. It was about confronting the next chapter of their shared narrative. Could he inspire his father to see the world through a different lens, or would he find himself still bound by the expectations of those who loved him? The stakes had never been higher, and Jake felt the weight of his choices looming over him like the evening shadows that swallowed the ranch whole. Little did he know, the real challenge would come not just from facing his father, but from within himself, as he grappled with the balance of dreams and reality. Would he summon the courage to push through, or would fear of alienation hold him back? The next few moments could change everything. Would they build a new bridge together, or would the chasm between their worlds remain forever unmarked? The night crept in quietly, wrapping the ranch in a serene stillness. Yet all Jake could sense was the storm brewing within him. The wind rustled through the trees, whispering secrets of uncharted possibilities. Yet Jake felt shackled by doubt. The next few moments could change everything. Would they build a new bridge together, or would the chasm between their worlds remain forever unmarked?
Each creak of the old house echoed his internal struggle, an unwavering reminder of the walls built around his father's expectations. Lying in bed, he tossed and turned, replaying the scene from earlier. His father's face, a patchwork of disappointment and skepticism, haunted him. The question hung in the air, "What do you really want, son?" Could he articulate that to himself, let alone to his father? The words were elusive, like fireflies in the dark, flickering and fading before he could grasp them. With a start, Jake sat up. Memories flooded over him, of childhood days spent roaming the hills and fields that defined their existence. Moments of laughter shared with his father as he tried to mimic the man's sturdy resolve. But then came the uncomfortable truth. He had slowly learned to conceal his artistic yearnings, draping them in shadows to avoid disapproval. But no longer. He needed to formulate a plan, to weave together his art and his legacy, not as two separate lives, but as one continuous narrative. The essence of ranching, with all its struggles and triumphs, could paint a rich tapestry for his work. More than that, it needed to resonate with his father, to show him that these could coexist without sacrificing one for the other. Eagerly, Jake grabbed a sketchbook and a pencil, and with a surge of inspiration, he began to draw. Each stroke released the tension within his heart, depicting the cattle grazing beneath an endless sky, the farmers toiling in the fields, and the sun setting behind the mountains. He envisioned a series that would capture the rugged beauty of the ranch, intertwined with elements of his artistry. Would this bridge the gap between tradition and his dreams? Would it finally ignite a passion in his father instead of despair? Days turned into weeks, and he poured himself into this endeavor with relentless commitment. He would rise with the dawn, tending to the ranch, and when the day's labor concluded, he transformed the starlit nights into a canvas of colors and emotions. No longer afraid to share his vision, he started inviting his father to observe, showing him the progress on his paintings, an unspoken plea for validation that echoed louder than words. However, Jake soon discovered the deeper challenge. Fear of failure gnawed at him, a fear that his art wouldn't measure up, or, even worse, that his father would see it as yet another childish pursuit to toss aside. Each canvas became a battleground of self-doubt, and walking the fine line between aspirations and reality proved more daunting than he had anticipated. An evening came when they sat together, the silence palpable, breathing into the shadows that hovered. Jake clutched his latest piece, the brushstrokes blending the tangible with the emotional. "Dad, look at this. It's not just a painting, it's our life," he ventured, voice trembling slightly. His father studied the scene, and the air thickened with anticipation. Would he merely see folly, or could he witness Jake's soul stitched into each stroke? Would this openness unravel decades of tension, or would it deepen their already fragile bond? As Jake awaited the words that would shape their shared future, he wondered if he possessed the strength to endure whatever response lay ahead. The seconds turned into moments, and he realized he stood at another crossroads. The power of his father's next words would either ignite a new path or drive further wedges between them. Would brave vulnerability offer the connection he longed for, or was he destined to face rejection, once again echoing the fears he fought so hard to overcome. The future hung suspended in that fleeting breath, and Jake felt the weight of their shared legacy pressing on his heart as he braced for the unveiling of the truth. Jake's heart raced as he watched his father's brow furrow, eyes narrowing in contemplation. The seconds seemed like hours, weighted with the silence that wrapped around them like a thick fog. He could feel the tension pulsing in the air, a terrible mix of hope and dread. Every intricate detail of his painting, colors blending to form the life they had built together, felt exposed, as if the canvas itself were holding its breath for an answer. "Son, it's different," his father finally muttered, his voice low and thick with uncertainty. "But, Art, I never expected you to go down this road." The words cut deeper than Jake anticipated. There it was, the stark reality of his father's disbelief, alienating him from the very passion he hoped to share. Jake forced himself to breathe, each inhale an attempt to steady himself against the weight of familiar disappointment. "It's not just art. It's our story, Dad. I want to capture what we have here, to show you that I'm not abandoning it. I'm trying to honor it." The words spilled out with urgency, a plea for understanding that he had craved for years. Another silence draped over them, heavy and suffocating. His father's gaze drifted from the painting to the ground, the uncertainty looming larger than the horizon before them. "Art is a luxury, Jake. We work hard here. I don't want you to think you can just paint your feelings away." His father's practicality poured forth, an unyielding shield against the vulnerability Jake desperately sought. Each word stung, but they also ignited a flicker of determination within him. "No one is asking you to dismiss the ranch," Jake replied, the fervor of his own voice surprising him. "Can't they coexist? Each brushstroke is a salute to what we've built, the cattle, the sunsets, the toil. I want you to see it that way." His father glanced back at the painting, and something within Jake shifted. He realized he couldn't just rely on words to convey his intentions. He would need to take bolder steps. Time became a precious commodity as he transitioned from internal conflict to the tangible actions required to blend his two worlds. Instead of inviting his father to observe passively, Jake decided to involve him actively in his artistic process. The following day, he set out with canvases and paintbrushes, ready to capture the ranch in its truest form. "Let's create together," Jake proposed as they ventured into the fields, offering brushes to his father, who hesitated before accepting one. He watched carefully as they painted side by side, their initial awkwardness giving way to a newfound rhythm. As daylight faded, painting under the amber glow of the setting sun, Jake felt the boundaries between them dissolve. Each brushstroke etched their shared history onto the canvas, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of interest in his father's eyes, less hardened and more reflective. "See, this can tell our stories. It's not just me manipulating paint, it's us." Jake's enthusiasm ignited a spark in his father that had long been dormant. But underlying their moments of creativity lingered the specter of self-doubt. Could this truly forge a connection, or would it only veil deeper fractures in their relationship? Jake's longing for approval teetered precariously alongside a fear of revealing too much, pushing him to confront older scripts ingrained within him. The sunset painted the sky with hues of orange and purple, mirroring Jake's resolve. Yet, as they neared completion of their joint creation, he understood that his father's acceptance remained tethered to Jake's own courage. The thought struck him. If he could confront his greatest fears about success and failure, he might unearth a deeper connection to not only his father, but also to himself. As they stepped back to examine their collaborative work, a vivid landscape alive with colors and emotions, Jake felt the pulse of possibility course through him. Would this venture bridge the generational divide, or merely postpone the inevitable confrontation of their differences? In the next days, Jake would need to navigate the complex emotions they'd stirred together. Could this blending lead to more than just shared brushstrokes? The journey ahead promised further challenges, pushing Jake to unearth the courageous spirit buried beneath expectations and to embrace the unknown paths his art might take. He wondered, with a surge of anxiety mixed with excitement, whether the painting was merely the beginning of a larger dialogue on identity, art, and legacy, or would he find himself facing yet another impasse in their relationship? Jake stood on the threshold of transformation, the warm evening light casting long shadows as he gazed at the canvas bearing witness to his journey, a vibrant depiction of ranch life woven with strokes of artistic expression. The loftiness of the auction day had now transformed into a realization that was both grounding and liberating. The weeks following his bold declaration had been filled with creative fervor and retrospective discussions with his father.
Every day spent painting alongside the man who had shaped his upbringing built intricate ties between their lives. Lesions formed from years of unresolved tensions began to heal, each brushstroke acting as an antidote against division. Here, immersed in their shared passions, Jake discovered a resonance that blossomed between duty and desire. One crisp afternoon, under a vast Texas sky that echoed the possibilities of his heart, Jake prepared to showcase his work publicly, a collection titled Ranch and Reverie. This would be his declaration, the mingling of legacy and artistry, harnessing the very essence of who he had become. With the local community invited, excitement faltered against the familiar grip of doubt. Would they embrace this new chapter, or would skepticism reign? As guests filtered in, whispers circled the gallery, eyes scanning the pieces that bore narrative depth. The cattle grazing against an expanse of painted clouds, farmers toiling under the sun, and vivid visions of passion interlaced with tradition. Clara lingered, her presence a constant source of encouragement, reminding him that vulnerability leads not only to acceptance, but to authentic connection. Each piece reflects our history, our struggles, Jake announced, feeling the warmth of camaraderie in their collective experience. As people began to engage with the art, he felt lines of separation dissolve. They conversed about colors and emotions, constructing bridges between notions of what it meant to nurture both ranching and artistic pursuits. But as he navigated through conversations, a familiar figure loomed at the entrance, his father. Jake's heart quickened at the sight, the anxiety bubbling to the surface. Would he find the courage to introduce this version of himself to the very man whose approval weighed heavily on him? "Dad," Jake started, approaching him, "I wish you could see what these paintings mean to me, what they can mean for us." Their eyes locked, the air thick with unspoken words. His father's gaze softened, taking in not just the artwork, but the transformation he saw in his son. "I'm here," was all he managed, but the admission felt monumental, an acknowledgement that Jake's artistic pursuits did not negate his roots. With Clara by his side, they navigated the gallery with his father, discussing themes and visions captured in each piece. As Jake pointed out intricate details in the paintings, he sensed a shift. His father's rigid demeanor began to thaw, replaced by curiosity, respect, and a hesitant acceptance of the melding of their worlds. "Your heart, Jake, I see you in this," his father finally admitted, a truth laid bare amidst their shared exploration. The understanding hung heavy, a transition was underway, burgeoning acceptance grounding them. Years of expectations cracked as meanings were reshaped. That pivotal evening concluded with laughter and applause, spurring Jake's spirit as his community rallied around this newfound narrative. He felt not merely recognized, but empowered. A deep sense of fulfillment surged through him as he realized the profound connection forged with his father amidst this candid sharing of art. A week later, Jake took to the canvas once more, the brush now his instrument of vivid expression, but also a means to further explore connections, inviting his father to collaborate on a new project that illustrated the seasons of ranching and life intertwined. The hours spent together renewed their bond, and with each shared stroke, their narratives converged, a dynamic representation of their joint legacy beginning to unfold. In this shared space, Jake transcended the weight of expectations.
He solidified his identity as both a rancher and an artist. With recognition from peers and acceptance from his father, he demonstrated that creativity did not threaten heritage, but enriched it. His resolve to paint would not wane, but rather catalyze family ties and forge an innovative path forward. In the intimate reflections of family discussions that evening, Jake articulated his ultimate goal. I want to inspire other cowboys and ranchers to own their passions, no matter the expectations tethered to them. As his family nodded in understanding, he felt solid confidence rise, a newfound support solidifying his competency in blending two realms. Great satisfaction coursed through him as he grasped that he was no longer wrestling against identity, but standing tall within it. Jake had indeed conquered the divide and embraced the artist within, a true cowboy creating not only legacies on the ranch, but a new legacy in art, a testament to the unyielding spirit of a dreamer willing to transform aspirations into a vibrant reality. Destiny had been rewritten through courage, passion, and the vibrant colors of his creation. Now was the moment, the culmination of personal achievement. For those yearning for transformational journeys, it's time to take the leap. You need to subscribe now to witness more incredible tales of personal overcoming. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and ensure more stories like this reach those who need them. Comment below your reactions and theories about Jake's journey. And finally, share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to amplify these messages.